everyone, I'm Whitney and I post a new tutorial every Wednesday to help sewers and quilters of all skill levels learn new projects and techniques. This video is part of my sampler sew along. It's a block of the month style series where I'm sharing 12 different traditional quilt blocks so that we can sew a sampler style quilt together from start to finish. If you found this video at random and want to know more about the sew along, you can find a playlist linked in the video description down below where I have all of the previous videos in the series, and while you're there, hit that red subscribe button so that you don't miss out on the rest of the videos in the series. Today's quilt block is called Diamond Panes. I found it referenced as a historical block and a classic block, but I couldn't actually find a date of when it originally was published. To make the block, you will need 2 light squares and 2 dark squares measuring at least 6 inches, 1 dark square measuring 2.5 by 2.5 inches, and 4 light rectangles measuring 2.5 by 5.5 inches. Place 1 large square of each color right sides together so all the edges are lined up. Grab a ruler and marking tool of choice and mark diagonally from one corner to the other on each set. Add a couple of pins and sew 1/4 inch away from the marked line on each side. Try to keep your stitching lines as straight as possible so your block will turn out looking as nice as possible. Here's how each piece should look at this point. Use a pair of scissors or a rotary cutter to cut directly on the marked line. If you're using a rotary cutter, make sure to pop on a rotary safe glove so you don't accidentally cut yourself like I did a few months back. You can find a link to the gloves in the video description. Lay each piece with the darker fabric on top, open, and press with your iron. This will help the seam allowance go toward the darker fabric. You now have 4 half square triangle units. Time to trim down each unit. My ruler has a diagonal line that I line up with the seam line on each square. Then trim down the square so that it measures 5.5 by 5.5 inches. I'm using a rotating cutting mat to make it a little easier to trim all 4 sides. Repeat until all 4 half square triangle units are trimmed down. Lay out all the pieces as shown on the screen, then start piecing them together into rows of 3. Flip the middle piece from the top row over on the first so they are right sides together with the edges lined up. Sew to attach with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Open and press so the seam allowance is going toward the darker fabric. Then repeat to add the 3rd piece to the row. Open and press, always making sure the seam allowance is going toward the darker fabric. Then move on to piecing the 2nd row together in the same manner as the first. And finally move on to the 3rd and final row. All that's left is to sew the 3 rows together, give the seams another press with the iron, and the block is complete. It should measure 12.5 by 12.5 inches right now and will be 12 when sewn into the finished quilt. Make sure to take a picture of your block and share it either on Facebook or on Instagram using the hashtag sampler sew along so that everyone else can see it. And then go ahead and pick out your fabrics for the next block in the quilt, which is shown here on the screen in gray. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next video in the series, and until next time, happy sewing!